Today we're going to talk about the rise of the community manager, and I want to come at this from a couple different angles. Um, Community is often looked at as philanthropy, and I want to look at this in multiple angles and not think about it just as philanthropy. When we think about like community builders and this, it's always looked at as like a non-essential role. And what we're seeing across the country is this is essential. And I'm going to start like talking about what community could mean in companies, and then I'm going to bring in like an expert. So Rosie, who's coming in, is probably one of the most fascinating people as a community builder in the world. She's lives in just outside of London, and she is fascinating to talk to about what makes community. And the funny thing we're going to talk to her about when she comes in the room is that she actually hates the term community manager, which will be a good talking point. So I'm going to give you a couple slides around like how Milwaukee builds community. And I think that's important to just kind of have a discussion and set some framework. And if anybody has any chat questions, I'd love for you to come off camera or come on camera or throw something in the chat because I want this to be as open as possible. And I will just get started here. So, community is kind of everywhere, right? Like when we start thinking about community and its impact, we have to think really different about what's happening right now. So you have company communities, you have online communities, you have communities that create communities that are in person. And these four communities here are completely different, right? So you have like Peloton, whose community members actually don't even interact, but it feels like a community. You have Slack that creates multiple channels of company communities. You have Reddit that has a very niche community that creates other communities, and you have Meetup that's like an interest-based community pretty much. All they're everywhere, right? Like we experience community and all these different like inroads into how do we actually connect to each other. The challenge is like modern society is like plagued by fragmentation. The various sectors of our communities and businesses and schools and social service organizations, churches, governments, they don't really work together as much as they should. And they kind of exist in their own worlds. So many individual citizens who are like long for connection end up marginalized, and their gifts are overlooked. Their potential contributing is lost. These disconnections and disattachments are hard, almost like if not impossible, to envision a common future where we all work together. And we know what a healthy community looks like. We've been there. There's many success stories out there. And really what I want to get into is how do we do this, right? Like how do we transform? How do we build community? How is it built? How does transformation occur? What are the fundamental shifts? There's many people out there that think that well, there's a lot of science out there that you can only have 150 known friends or in your strong network. We have social media platforms. We're connected to thousands. So how do we actually form that, and what's the return for us? Like so often that communities are we think about like them in terms of, again, philanthropy, but when you start thinking about the ROI of communities, there's a lot of research out there actually on the impact and the ROI of what happens to community. My company in Milwaukee, we're 12 years old. The return we've had on building community in Milwaukee has been amazing. And if we always put community first, we see a lot of return on that. And what's really interesting is like when you get into a business sense of like what it looks like to have a community manager inside of a business, inside of an organization, you actually get a lot of return on that as well. But building community inside of business can be, is that community? So that's what we're going to talk to Rosie about today. and I'm pretty excited to do that. So I'm going to just give you a couple quick tips here around building community and what we do. Our step one is authentic, meaningful, and like find the why, and will that resonate? So when you start to build community, if there's people in the room, I know there's a lot of community managers on here that join based on your RSVPs. What's your passion? What's your goal? What's your reason? How are you starting this? Is it authentic? And why is it important? Second thing is, this is going to sound interesting in today's world, but the best communities create boundaries, and boundaries can happen when you have to be intentional about them, right? Great online communities have boundaries. They split insiders from outsiders. The boundary might be what have members done, what what members want it to be, who's in, who's out. And it's almost like inclusivity through exclusivity is what great communities seem to have. And if you think about how we build cities and neighborhoods, they all have boundaries, even if they're artificial. But great communities always have boundaries, and it's kind of a thing um, that we have to think about, and how do we build that. But when you let go of the boundaries, those communities actually suffer from that. And the good thing communities have is like getting people have been building communities wide and shallow, but good online or even in-person communities, the key is to go narrow and deep. And those communities, when we'll talk to Rosie about this, is where you see major success when you find a niche. And great communities have rituals. People look forward to something. When you have people that are looking forward to things, whether it's the annual event, whether it's the get-togethers, whether it's defining those things. Rituals motivate us, they move us. Through rituals we build family, we build community, we make transitions, and we mark important events in our lives that express ourselves in joy and sorrow, and perhaps most importantly, we create identity through rituals. And communities and rituals are ever evolving, right? So we don't need to isolate them. They're not just religious, but we become obsessive around these rituals, and these are what good communities have. Whether it's in your company outings, your company, how do you create those things? And I'll give you a couple examples. I'm a part of a really interesting community from a founders group. This started during a pandemic. There was a text thread that started between 10 founders and is now 45 founders in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And our rituals are, when anybody has any success, they share it. We co-work together every Wednesday. We have a happy hour every Wednesday. We're creating a founders fest annual. And then we do reflection runs where we all run together, and every mile we talk about a reflection that we have in our founding. So these rituals creep us back. It takes a while for these to grow, and they grow organically when you have rituals. And we over communicate. What does the community stand for? Why are you a part of this? And I think people sometimes under communicate community, but we over communicate. It takes 60 to 90 hours to turn an acquaintance into a meaningful relationship. We know that. And it actually takes 6 months in person to make a meaningful relationship. If you're being repetitive around how you interact with each other, it actually takes 1 year online. So it takes longer online to create meaningful relationships because of the social cues. And people come back to communities when they feel good, when they feel valued, when they are connect with others, they feel like they belong, and they need help. And the key is what else? And these communities keep building on what they do. What else? And good communities value connection over just engagement, right? Like we always talk about, like, is this an engaged member in our community? How do we engage? And connection is actually what we really thrive for. And there's a really interesting statistic: 63% of communities empower members frequently, all the time. And there's different ways we empower people. We always ask questions on our social media or in our groups, in our platforms. We provide solutions. People feel like they're connecting. They feel like they're being heard. Are they being seen? Are they leading? All these things are what makes communities stronger. And then one of the most important things is onboarding integration communities, because people sometimes don't know if they belong. So what is your process in your community that you do this with? Is it, there's certain people that are, join a community, they want to get involved, they join a committee, they do this, they do that. That's a, nature versus nurture type of thing. So it's like looking out for those people that need more nurture to get involved and be engaged. They want, your values and mission. They want friendship and belonging. And so when you're building an onboarding strategy, it's like, how do you build these things into the first 30 days of your community? So um, I'm going to bring Rosie in. Is Rosie in right now? Wyatt? I'm sorry, I don't know if Wyatt's in here.
No, I do not see her.
Okay. 1 second. Well, how about this? Anybody else have any thoughts on their community? We'll put in the chat and we'll put it in. I want to come off camera and share some kind of reflections.
We have one question from the chat, which is, we're talking about the ROI of community, and how is that calculated really, or how do you kind of quantify that?
Yeah, the study was actually really interesting. So it was financially, like donations, sales. Also, it was done on earned media. So the longer you build community, the more media you get perception. It was also done on membership growth in the community, so community members. So, the longer a community exists, obviously the more relevant it is and the more growth there is. And so they did multiple angles, and I'll send out in the recap of this when we send out the actual recording. I'll send out um, the survey. It was really interesting. Jeremy, can you send us is how you facilitate through Milwaukee's empower members? Thanks, Lauren, for the question. The empower members, what do you mean by that?
So on your previous slide, about 63% of communities empower members, just wondering if you can share a few examples about some of the bullets that were there, especially asking questions, being heard, and leading. Very curious about some successful examples that you've seen.
Yeah, so, the difference between events, a network, and community is really interesting, right? When you think about like an event, anyone can throw an event and people will show up. That is very interesting. The second thing is a network. People can build a network. Is that network a community? Maybe, maybe not. When you get to a community, the community actually provides input, creates opportunity, doesn't need someone at charge of it, right? Like they don't need someone to talk to someone else. They don't need that. Like they basically have authority, and it's a difference between creating a big network. There's a lot of groups that very person to people, where the leader of the network actually creates a lot of content, but the members don't engage with each other. They don't feel like they have permission, and there's a lot of that, right? Like, so there's a lot of people that create networks instead of these like communities where people just have, it's almost like decentralized, right? Like a good community is decentralized, and that's the how we empower people, like giving people authority to create change. I'm gonna Why did you see Rosie yet? Is she in there? Or is she in? How do you create boundaries? Yeah, so boundaries is a really good connect. You know, we're in this thing where we want to be radically inclusive, but when you start thinking about communities, it's around exclusivity. But you can be inclusive and exclusive at the same time, and how you do that. So when you think about creating boundaries, it's like, you know, it's like almost like rules of how you engage. So don't think of it as like who's not in and who's not out, but think about it as like who wants to be in, who wants to be out. So I have a founders group that I'm a part of where it's only for founders, right? It's a title, it's a place where we all share and we get radically vulnerable on who we are, why we're there, and how we create change. Sorry, I'm just trying to get oh, here she is. Yeah. One second, you guys, we're just having a little technical difficulty getting Rosie in here. Give me 1 second. Okay. Why are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Is she was in and now she's out. I wonder if she's
Alright.
having internet issues.
You might be having internet issues at this moment.
Can we? Okay.
I will
Sorry
reach
about
out
this,
to her.
everyone. I'm gonna just. Send her a quick link here. Why, can you share a link in the chat for, or in the, oh, never mind, she went out again. Okay, it must be internet issues. Sorry, everyone. We should have flew her in. Okay. So, any other thoughts on boundaries? I'm gonna why we want to have more reflection why we wait for Rosie. Anyone in the chat or want to come up Zoom or maybe talk about what community they created? You know, if there's your time. Jesse, do you want to come off camera and talk about that? Or come on camera? Jesse, do you want to chat about that? I'm not camera ready. Okay, perfect. Awesome.
A lot of boundaries sort of are naturally created in just the reason why a group is gathering together in the first place. So it doesn't necessarily, like you said, Jeremy, need to be about exclusion. It's about why are people together in the first place.
Right. Can you talk more about this, like chapter 2? Like what are you discussing there?
Are you talking to me or the person who originally asked the question?
Oh, sorry. I thought that was Jesse. We have a new chat here. Clyde, do you want to chat more about this? Why I try to figure out this technical glitch here?
Yeah, no, I think that it's funny the way you put it, sort of being, we're in a time of life where everyone's trying to be radically inclusive, which is a good thing, but at its core, really, you know, building any kind of community starts with kind of the sort of smallest or the common denominator, whatever that is. It can be around a certain value, or you can be Bucks fans, or Southsiders, or whatever the case may be. But starting with that sort of that smallest common denominator, where people are again bringing their full selves to it. I like the notion of sort of decentralizing it, so it's not about one person, it's not about one sort of figurehead or any kind of cult of personality, but really, what does this group collectively have in common? And naturally, if it's a big idea, people will glom on. They're gonna be those big ideas where there's like the Steve Jobs equivalent of just a lot of people just get it or see it, whatever. But if you don't start with that being the notion, but start with kind of what am I really about? What is this group really about? What is it that we can kind of share together? I think there's usually a big opportunity there for both from a business standpoint as well as just a general community development and empowerment standpoint.
That was awesome. I completely agree. And we finally have Rosie here. Rosie, you want to?
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. I think I had two different links. I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, that was weird. We have some technical difficulties, but good communities get through that. So, so why don't you, for everybody in here, kind of give us an overview of all the things you've built and are still building.
Yeah, sure.
And introduce yourself.
Okay. So hello everyone. I'm Rosie. I've been building community for about 15 years now. I started off running local meetups in my hometown in Brighton in the UK. And then I went on to build Ministry of Testing, which I bootstrapped or indie hacked over the course of like 10 years to kind of this relatively big global community of software testers, and doing conferences kind of around the world, and building an online community alongside that. So yeah, I did that for 10 years. And then after that, I led the community at Indie Hackers. And that was good fun. Indie Hackers is a community for kind of independent founders. And it was started by a guy called Cortland, and quite early on it was acquired by Stripe. And so that was good fun doing that for a couple of years. I've also been, as I was doing Indie Hackers, I started writing about community, and I've been doing that over at Rosie Land, and that's basically kind of my space. That's kind of started as a newsletter, and it's turning more into like an online community about being meta and going, it's all about community building. And yeah, more recently, I joined Orbit as the kind of community lead to help lead up the community efforts. And Orbit is kind of a new startup that building software for communities to help people build better communities.
I'm gonna go right into, before I get into like all my questions, I want to go right into the title of this is The Rise of the Community Manager. And then after we made the title, I saw your tweet about how you hate the term community manager. So I want just kind of, I want you to rip our title of this event out. And why don't you like that term?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I didn't
don't worry.
I didn't even see the name of this. Well, I think it's very much a case of like, even like going back to when I started at Indie Hackers, which wasn't that long ago, is that I came on to like lead the community, and as kind of like the single community person there. And like, as you're thinking of like job titles, it's like the only option that seemed to be going around was like, you're either a community manager or you're like a head of community, right? So it's like, right, okay, yeah, maybe I am a community manager if I'm leading or managing a community, but like if it was someone else coming into that same role, they would have been called community manager as well. And generally people just like get given the title because there's no other title. So they could be like, it could be like their first job as, you know, within community, and they would be called community manager. And it just doesn't seem to fit. It's like, why isn't there like other roles available? Why does it have to be you're managing community?
Yeah.
And then I guess like the other aspect is like, well, are we managing a community, or are we, you know, as a philosophy kind of behind it, are we kind of nurturing it or leading it or designing it or architecting it, all these kind of things. And I guess like come like COVID, it's like people have been giving community more attention. And I guess like, you know, as the industry kind of slightly advances, because people are paying attention to it and willing to like, you know, I guess improve the industry a bit, people are starting to think of different titles. So it's not just like community manager, it's like community operations or community events manager or community events organizer. There's many roles within community that you can kind of take on, and it doesn't have to be like all about just like managing it, I guess.
Yeah. And I just want to like go to people in the room too. Like, you know, this is a digital fireside chat. But if you have questions too, let's, you know, I don't want to ask all the questions. I have a whole list of things I want to talk about, but please put it in the chat if you have a question right now, or if you raise your hand if you want to ask the question. Let's keep this going. I'll start it off by we're seeing like a huge rise in community managers inside companies. Sometimes, you know, a company can be a community, but where does it go wrong when you start thinking about like unauthentic communities? Like, can you talk a little bit about like how people get this wrong and what they do differently, and how is a company, that's like 6 questions in one, but like go into this kind of company as a community type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely I think interesting and challenging and changing kind of landscape. And I don't pretend to have any kind of like specific answers. I do think about this kind of stuff a lot, but I think, well, my hope is that people are starting. I think people are starting to see community as its own kind of specialism now. I don't think that was the case like pre-COVID, but I think increasingly people are willing to see that, and I think over time, like we'll kind of like learn as we go. But it's like I guess like one example that I see a lot at the moment is like marketing saying community is a new marketing. It's like they see like community as this opportunity to you know obviously grow their business and get leads and all of that. And community is great for that, but it's like I think we have to be very careful not to let other kind of industries or departments like take over what community can be and should be. So I guess like in my ideal world is that community is like exists in collaboration with all these other departments, with exists in collaboration with marketing and in collaboration with sales, but it still has this kind of autonomy to make decisions that they feel are right and not decisions led by kind of like marketing or sales or even I guess other areas.
I feel like we're gonna get to that point where community is the hot button, and then it becomes not community when it becomes transactional over relationships. Is that kind of a fair assessment of what you think was going to happen? Like, I feel like that's where it's going, right?
Yeah. And as I've been thinking about it, I've been thinking, well, what does community do? What does community create for marketing? Because I love marketing, right? I love like the power of like what marketing can do. But like I've kind of been thinking of the angle that it's like community creates this trust for marketing and sales, so that the marketing and sales team can then leverage that trust to communicate better and to promote things to them. But because like community has put in the effort to build up that trust and those relationships, then it almost like empowers marketing. It gives them like a 10x kind of return on their money, because there's this trust factor and where people are willing to listen. And I think that's where the power is. And you know, it's I think a lot of it's still kind of theory, but I think also if you look at like some of the companies that do have community at the heart of things, then you can see that within you know how their organization works and how powerful community can be.
You know, community is like at the beginning of this was talk. I feel like when you say community building, business looks at that as a nonprofit endeavor worth philanthropy dollars, and now they're starting to really, I mean, maybe not here in like local Milwaukee, but you're seeing companies across the country think about community as like not just an ROI, but like you know, a real business case for them, right? Is that, am I kind of right on that? Is that a thing where, you know, it's I think the change from philanthropy to a business case is gonna like really, I feel like that's happening, but we're not seeing it like in person. Do you see that too? Am I just kind of wrong on that assumption, or?
Well, it's yeah, well, I think, you know, you're right. And maybe it's like part of the challenge is like we need to change this perception of us and what we can achieve.
Right.
And like maybe it's about tracking those relationships or those activities that we do in a better way to show the value of what we are doing. You know, I guess like off the top of my head, if like someone, let's say, buys something from you, how do you really know where that sale came from? You know, so yes, you can track links in emails, but if they don't buy straight away, how do you really know? And why does like sales and marketing get all the credit for that and not community? What if like you could track back at least some of the activity to the community endeavors that had gone in, and like if you started like building community 5 years ago and it took this person 3 years to actually, you know, buy their first thing from you, is it possible to track that back to community? And I think that's where it can get interesting. But we don't track things, and I'm not sure whether we should. But it's just like, you know, these are like discussions, I guess, that are worthy of having.
Yeah.
Because I think like, you know, I guess sales and marketing like to take all the credit for like the work, but it's like credit comes from everywhere. It's not just them, it's the whole, you know, organization, and it's not just community either.
I saw a really interesting meme about about community the other day. I thought it was pretty fascinating. It was like, and it might be a marketing thing too, like a branding thing, but it was community is kind of like, well, or advertising is like telling everybody you're single. Marketing is telling everybody that, or asking someone on a date, and the person that says yes is your community or your brand, right? Like what you stand for. They'll say yes because of that. And I thought that was like kind of a really, you know, meaningful, thoughtful, like analogy to how great brands or community, I guess, you know, makes an impact. I kind of want to know, you're starting to put like, and if Wyatt, if you can put the link to the newsletter on there. You run this massive newsletter that has all this information on it, and it's business, it's personal, it's authentic. Like you basically are an aggregator of community across the world. Can you just talk a little bit about that, and then I'll go into some more detailed questions, and then there's a couple questions in the chat I'll go to.
Yeah, every Monday I send out a weekly newsletter on community building. So that newsletter contains everything that managed to find, well, everything that I think is of some kind of value that I've managed to find on the topic of community building. So
what does that take, by the way? Because I gotta think that takes like 7 hours to like put all those together.
yeah, it probably takes me 3 or 4 hours every week. I've kind of developed a process behind it, and it's a process that I actually think it's not necessarily community building, but it's what I think like community builders should be doing. And this is a newsletter I've been building now for like 2 years, which is kind of crazy to think about that. But I started, I did this for Ministry of Testament as well. So I have this thing about like creating processes and like curating information. And at the heart of that is using RSS to do that. So my strategy is mostly every time I see a blog that it is like remotely community building related or even businessy, or kind of like in line with my kind of world view or world interests, then I stick it into my RSS reader. If it's community related, I stick it into my community folder or my Rosie Land folder. If it's like indie hacking related, then I would put it into indie hacking. And most of my newsletter is based on the information that comes through there. Obviously, like I scan through it, I only pick whatever's relevant. It's probably about 10% of what goes through there actually makes it into the newsletter, if even that. That's taken, it's forever evolving, and it's 2 years in, it's always been added to. But for me, it's a really efficient way of an important way of just keeping on top of everything that's going on. So you can't rely on social media and the algorithm. This is like RSS it feeds out posts, that sorted by date. So there's no algorithm to like trick you and hide stuff from you if it thinks that it's not interesting. And it's just like, for me, it's like when you build community or when you're trying to specialize in anything, I believe you have to know what's going on in the world around you. So this is my way of building up that picture. It's my way of researching. When I started 2 years ago, even though I had been building community for like X amount of years, I hadn't really kind of gotten involved in the world of community builders. And this was my way of taking steps towards that. And it's my way of kind of being accountable. So I know, like, if I say to myself, I'm going to do a newsletter every week, I show up and do it. So yeah, I say, I've just sent out issue 91. So that's like almost 2 years of that, which is crazy to think about. But it's for me a great strategy just to study your people, and it's this phrase "study your people" that I often refer back to quite a lot when I talk about building communities. Like, when you build community, you need to know who your people are. And if I'm building community for community builders, I need to know everything that's going on.
About it,
Yeah.
One of the really interesting question from Nick here is, where is the, before you got on, I was talking about boundaries and, how important they are in communities. Where is the boundary for leveraging the community's trust when it comes to using that trust for intentional or unintentional manipulation? Which is a pretty deep question, but seems like there's something there that Nick really wants to know. So let's dissect that.
Yeah, the boundaries. It's tough. I guess, like, it's like what is a boundary? The boundaries to me are values that are important to me, alongside ethics and things like legalities. Like, you should with what's values that are important to me is that I value diversity, I value respect, I value, you know, good kind of relationships. And I would do whatever I can to make people around me feel comfortable. I would consider the person that I'm speaking to and try to see things from their perspective. If we think of ethical boundaries, for me, ethics are quite high up on my list. So it's like there's definitely certain things that I won't do that are legal, but perhaps not very ethical. So like, I'm very mindful about like the emails I send out, or how I reach out to people, or how I use people's data. You know, that's you have to, you know, for me, it's like build things because it's the right thing to do, and like communicate with people because it's the right way to do things. And I guess like when it comes through, when it's with community in mind, it's like, you know, I never go into a conversation thinking like, what am I going to get out of this? It's like I go into it more with, well, you know, what can we get out of it, or what can I give this person?
Yeah.
So like the more like you don't try to serve your personal needs, I think that's a good boundary to have. And it's not that you won't get anything out of it. I think like you will. You know, I've certainly gotten a lot out of building community just by trying to connect with people and help people.
I think, you know, to me, boundaries too could be rules of engagement, you know, like how people should interact with each other, you know, setting up those initial, like, I guess, values of the organization. And like, I think sometimes when we say boundaries, people think like, well, this is too exclusive. And you're basically, what you're really getting at is like, who is this for? How do you feel like you belong here? And you're trying to set up that kind of engagement. I'm going to go to we're getting a bunch of questions here now. Here's a really interesting one. And I'm actually really interested in how do you build a community within a corporate department? And okay, Lucas has a 30-page novel he just wrote in the question, which is awesome. But we'll go, how do you build community in a corporate department? I'll just let you respond to
that. Is this in the context of like a community of practice?
I
or
think
just
yeah, I don't why don't the context if whoever asked that question, sorry, there's
hi, this is Ken. Oh, I have a weird background. I did an event, sorry.
no worries.
With kids, so I still have the background behind me. But hi, this is Kenji Adams, and I work a lot with corporations and large corporations and helping them bridge between their programs that they want to implement in the community. So I do a lot with nonprofits and working with them with corporations and bringing them together. But my question is, I'm currently working for a large corporation, and they all have different programs, but they all, you know, want to do good. They all bubble up to the same mission. So how do I create a sense of community within within a department each have different initiatives and work streams, but they all have the same goal. They all are thriving toward the same thing. But how do I keep it not so operationalized and have a sense where they can kind of build from each other, learn from each other, and grow without, I think Jeremy was talking earlier about it being so like transactional. So how can it be more of an organic community even within a group who all they have different outcomes that they're trying to reach personally for their objectives, but all initially have the same goal of doing good?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question because like it's quite often hard to like get stuff off the ground in the corporate environment. Yeah. I would probably suggest like speaking to the people that you want to build community with, and having like just like real conversations about what are the things that excite them, what are the things that we can do together to like achieve goals together, and just kind of like, you know, even without like, a clear agenda in mind, just like, maybe pick a few people at semi-randomly, and just get a feel for like what their lives are day to day, and like how much can you like, I guess, work within the boundaries that the corporation has, without necessarily saying you're building community. It's, I guess it's like, I think like community, the foundation of a lot of community is based on like conversations. So it's like the more conversations you can like have with people, and then the more conversations you can encourage others to have with each other, then out of that will kind of hopefully naturally create kind of some kind of community form. And it might not be like, what you originally envisioned to be, but, it ends up becoming what's the right thing that needs to be created. And the ideas that can come from other people as well can, be quite amazing as well.
I do a lot of placemaking, Rosie, or have over the course of my career, and I always feel this connection of a space isn't a place until someone does something that you haven't intended for that use, right? So someone creates ownership of something that you didn't even think about, is where I feel like community happens, right? Like when someone starts doing things that you like, these are the specific rules of this place, and then when someone does something, you're like, oh, why would they do that there? And it's like, well, because I feel ownership of the plate. Like that's the most important thing, is when people do, something has changed. And in a corporate setting, it is obviously the same thing. Like when someone feels empowered to do something that's bucks a trend, or like, then you've kind of got that, right? Like someone feels, I wouldn't say entitled, but their voice should be heard. I think is important in community building in a corporate department. We have like 70 questions now, so I'm going to try to like platform through, or like really go through this quick. Ian asked, is it best to gather community members on a single preferred platform, or can thriving community successful build across multiple platforms? And I want to also think about, you're putting together a massive community. I saw on Twitter like this, all these uses that you could use on community, but I'll say this, there's a lot of psychology behind digital platforms that you might want to think about. Proximity bias is really important. Proximity is really important to relationships. The closer you live to someone, you will have a lot more, you'll expedite friendship or relationships. But a way to actually create proximity digitally is through multiple platforms. So if you get a text message, and then you get a message on Slack, and then you get an email, it actually creates a meaningful thought that you're close to somebody. So when you start thinking about platforms, one platform is good to gather people, but multiple messaging through different platforms actually feels like you're close to somebody. But I'll let you answer that question around different platforms that are people to get started.
Yeah, I had never really thought about it from that kind of perspective, but I like that. That the multiple aspect is like, you feel like if you see people in multiple places, I think you do feel like
they just won't get away from you. You're like, yeah, person's just all over.
And I think like you can also like see different parts of people from different platforms, right? So if you're following someone on Twitter and then you follow them on Instagram, for example, you kind of see different aspects of their lives quite often. It's not always the case, but so yeah, that's interesting. But also, I guess like the way I've been thinking about it a lot is when people build communities, often they think about this one platform that they want to build. This is their home, and this is where people are going to show up. Whereas if you think of community from a community members' perspective, people don't want to show up in one location. And that's, I think why it's so hard to like build communities, because there's this mismatch of kind of expectations where people want to show up in all these different places and get to know people in different ways. Yet the communities that people are trying to build, they're trying to build it in one location. So the short answer to that question is yes, and I would probably recommend it is choose 2-3 platforms where you feel like your people are hanging out, and perhaps to like rethink like what is a community platform, and that's not necessarily a forum. I think I'm trying to start seeing like any tool where you can communicate with people is potentially a community tool.
Awesome. Rachel has a very specific question here, and we'll try to answer very specifically, Rachel. So let's say you're starting at 0 and you want to, you have 0 members, or you don't really know the intentional community within an org. What are 3 steps, I guess, to start community? What would you do?
Yeah.
Very specific.
Yeah,
no, we don't want to like go wide. We want to go narrow and deep right now.
Yeah, I would 3 steps. I would talk to people. I would find people to talk to. I would develop a process to kind of get to know them well, like following them on Twitter or their blogs. And then I would try to start thinking about what can I share or write about that might be of interest to them, and kind of start experimenting with that.
That was pretty specific.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's just like sometimes it's repetition. It's like making yourself uncomfortable for a little bit to understand. Like going inside our comfort zone, I think, is where community for me always starts. It's like I'm gonna go somewhere or do something that I outside of what I would do it in my norm, and then I get there and I meet that person, or I talk to that person, and then I become passionate, and then I like the curiosity, I guess, is like where I would start with curiosity. What are you curious about? And then how do you really just drive in that curiosity? If you're not curious about the community, then the community shouldn't exist, right?
Yeah.
So Lucas has a 17-page novel he wrote in our chat, and I'm gonna try to. Lucas, why don't you just come off camera and or come on camera? Why do I keep saying come off camera? Come on camera and ask that question. We're still on here. Maybe Lucas doesn't have audio. That's why he wrote this.
Hey, can you hear me?
There we go.
Hey, there we go. I guess it really wasn't totally a question. I was going off of Nick's question and then just commenting on what Rosie was saying about like marketing, and it's kind of a hot button for me, I guess, and I just wanted to share some thoughts, I guess, and would love to hear what your thoughts are, Rosie, on this, the community being the goal rather than being like marketing saying like, oh, we're trying to build a community so that we can sell our product. We're instead saying we're trying to sell our product so that we can serve our community. I feel like that perspective shift like makes a really big difference. And I guess to turn it into a question, how would you say that, like, as a marketer, like, how do we, make sure that our intent is correct in that, and how do you properly, market with the goal of I'm trying to build a community, not just trying to sell a product?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess like I like to tap into my personal experiences, and like when I built up Ministry of Testing, I was very much wearing a community hat and a marketing hat and a business owner hat, right? I was doing it all for quite a long time. And I think like what a lot of marketeers or marketing departments might not understand is like the need for kind of respect for people's just for people, right? It's like just because like people are participating and contributing, it doesn't give them a right to kind of use that data or abuse that data to try to like sell to them constantly. I think where marketing could like, or you know, it's tough because like you know, there's overlaps with everything. So what, like community, for example, is hugely beneficial to businesses to you know, I say like build a moat, but you know, I don't really like that term, but you know, I think business leaders do, is like you can build a moat by working closely with your community, by understanding what they're really talking about and what they really care, and getting like really deep insights that most other companies will never kind of get without investing the time into the community. You know, there are businesses who evolve their products, their lines, you know, their services, all based on like the feedback and contributions from like what their community are talking about and what they care about. So I guess like if we're thinking about that from a marketing perspective, it's like when I'm marketing like with community in mind, I don't want to piss off the community, right? It's like, you know, it's like traditionally like marketing is like, you know, you might have this like process of, right, the process of selling a product, let's say an event, is, you know, there's 10 emails that go out over the course of 3 months to promote the event. When I promote events, I literally send out 2, maybe 3 emails maximum, because you know, I just don't want to annoy people, and I don't believe it's kind of the right way. And I think like, you know, there's probably like lots of synergies that you can have. Like marketing is great for, you know, communicating, so it's like and you know, a great way with words. And you know, I'm not necessarily a great marketeer, but I think like marketers could do great to lift up the community members, to find strategies to lift them up, as an example, to tell stories around the community, and to collaborate with the community team to kind of share you know, things that are going on, or work on projects together, all those kind of things. It's like
the shared experience, right? Like
yeah,
what Rachel, because you're Rosie, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of your work has been in virtual communities. Most of my work has been in person, like, you know, hyper local type of communities. Rachel is just asking, is that your context for most of your discussions, is like virtual communities as opposed to in person?
Well, at Ministry of Testing, we did lots of conferences, in real life conferences before COVID. And our community started online, but then we ended up doing conferences because I got to know the community, and that's what I felt like they needed. I didn't like decide that from the outset.
I think this is Barb has a really great question, actually. Can you give us an example that you've seen in the last couple of years that you think has been successful in engaging community? And I'll just say that well, we'll keep going here, but for me, the King Cross Regeneration Project, I'm guessing this is in the UK for King Cross, but is a great example of how they build the community, an attractive area for people to come together and live, visit, especially since the area was derelict for so long. For reference, she puts a link in here. So really the question is like engagement, and I saw, sorry, I've been stalking your Twitter a lot, so I saw the other day that your like connection over engagement was like in a thread. I guess talk about that. Like we always talk about engagement, like how engaged our employees, how engaged is our community. You know, a lot of people in a community might not even participate, right? Like I think one of the data points I shared is, you know, maybe half your community never is engaged as you think that one, you know, 20% is, you know, that. So talk a little bit about like things that you've done really well in community, or you've seen in community building and around engagement.
Yeah, I wish I had more local examples. I actually think like local community is like very much underserved, and I'd love to see more technology like serve local communities. But yeah, going back to like connection over engagement, I feel like engagement is something that people want to measure. You know, it's like if you look at tools, it's like they measure the engagement, how people, like how many comments, how many posts, how many DMs, or how often they're kind of logging in. Like you can see that, I think, in Slack, because like how often people are actually logging in and checking in on stuff. And I guess like part of what I've been trying to think about are like the words that we use for community and the words that make me feel icky, and how can we work towards using better words. And like engagement makes me feel icky as a community builder. Connection makes me feel better about it. It's like I want to create connection. I don't necessarily want to engage, and I don't want to be measured by the conversations I have. I want to show up places and really connect. And I guess like the challenge with COVID and everything is like it's almost gotten like so overwhelming. Like everyone, or almost everyone, wants to start a community, and people, there's no shortage of stuff, right? But what I feel there's a shortage is this real connection, this one-on-one or small group kind of like just real conversations without like specific outcomes. So you can work towards goals, or there'll be similarities, but to build community like with looking at the human first before like looking at anything else, I think is missing a lot everywhere.
Yeah. What's the future of community here? I mean, as we see, you have Google hiring community managers. You have a lot of coastal companies in the United States. Just like that's the new thing, right? Like we are hiring community managers to manage our communities. Like where's the future of this go? Is it so ingrained in corporations that it's becomes the opposite of what it was initially intended for?
I hope not. I hope not. Yeah, I mean, I literally for Orbit wrote a post. Well, we had a Twitter Spaces chat last week, and we chose a topic of the future of community. And I'm not one to really predict about things, but we kind of riffed on that, I guess. And yeah, I'm trying to think about what we said now. I even wrote a post on it, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I like to think that the future of community is invested in, is respected. I like to think that the future of communities, we have options for creativity, and God, what else? It's like I guess the future of community is there for us to define it, not how it's been defined in the past. I think it's been probably badly defined, and we have like this opportunity to redefine what community means to us. And I think we've had years of pressure of like big numbers, like community is nothing without the big numbers. But I think that the future of communities, and at least starting really small, and we should go back to that and literally go back to like one-to-one conversations and rediscover who we are as people.
Yeah, I feel like my hope for the future is that community is invested in more, and I think but not like, and I've said this multiple times, but I'll just repeat it, not from a philanthropic lens, right? Like from this is a real business case or community case to invest in this, and we're not putting we have 1% of our money that we'll put into a community building type of thing, and I just think like that even makes it not as when you do it, like when you say we have 1% that goes into community building projects, it's not the type of investment that makes impact to me. We have to think about that. There was and I'm going to transition really quick because I actually wanted to get your take on this. There was a really interesting post or in one of your tweets about Aubrey Marcus, who I was unfamiliar with. I think he is like he basically said you should have no more than 150 people in a community, and then he starts with 30 or 40 people to build community. Like you need 30 or 40 people to create like a movement, and then it goes to 150, and then you have to create another one because there's too many people over there. What are your thoughts on that? I think it was religious based, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been aware of that number in general over the years. I think it makes sense, right? It's something that you can easily nod your head to. So yeah, that makes sense. I can't disprove it.
True. Well, there's some like psychology around people can only remember or have like 150 is the max for friendship, right? Like you can only have a network of under 50 people that you have any meaningful knowledge of. And social media has actually changed that, right? Like we have 1,000 people on our some people have 10,000. Like how do you can't, your brain isn't big enough to manage that many relationships.
Yeah.
And like psychology has come to the 150. So I think that's where he was going with that. But I would like, I always thought community started with 1 or 2 people, but I guess he's saying like you need 30 people that started. Is there any relevance to that? Have you heard that before?
I don't know. I like to think that community can be really small, and I think perhaps this goes back to the other point. Is like I kind of believe like we're at a point where we can redefine all of these things. It's like this 150 Dunbar number is like it's been going around for years, but now that we're like in a completely different era, how does that change things, and how can we, it might be that loosely it's 150, but maybe there's a lot of crossovers, right? That can still, build communities in creative ways that was never thought possible before all of this. And that's why I'm reluctant to say yes or no. It's like, I've read about that over the years, and generally, yes, I seem to agree with that. But at the same time, I kind of, at the moment, I want to keep a really open mind about what can we achieve with community, and how can we innovate. And I think to innovate, we have to be open-minded about everything we read.
This is a really thoughtful question from Nick too, is what is your take on intentionally building a micro community inside of a macro community? I mean, that kind of goes back to the different question before about like building a community with your team instead of the whole company. But yeah.
I actually think a lot of communities form out of bigger communities, right?
Yeah.
So quite often, like you'll get a community, and then it will grow and keep growing, and then people within it will either like start completely new communities separately, or start something else within that community. So like either like subgroups, stuff like that, or just go off and create something completely new but related. So definitely, because and I think communities are great for that, and we should encourage that to a certain extent, even though it can be quite hard, like if like other communities like form and create something completely separate. I think we see a lot of that with like meetup groups. Like there's quite a few kind of chapter-based communities where someone starts something on a theme. Like I started a Girl Geek Dinners meetup because I saw someone else do Girl Geek Dinners in London. I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I'll do that, and I'll just call it the same. And we're kind of part of the same community, but it's still it's separate, but it's connected. So yeah.
I think Nick's question around micro community is that's, I mean, like, there's so much to unpack there, but you get inspiration from other people, right? Like micro communities are, here's another question from Nick. What about starting micro communities that eventually connect to a macro community? Nick, do you want to come on camera, not off camera, like I keep saying, and just kind of elaborate more on that?
Yeah, so I feel like community is this buzz thing now that everybody's clamoring to, and everybody wants to do it. And I think
Nick, you have nice soft jazz in the background too.
Yeah.
There's our music in the back.
Yeah,
It's a
there's music
soothing
in the-
question.
Yeah. So I frankly, like I'm a nerd on community, but I'm hesitant to join big macro communities that don't have a specific intention for my interest or my goals or my cause. And I'm going to be more apt to join a micro community that then allows me to connect to other interests, to other causes that are in part, of this macro group of people. And I don't necessarily always want to be with all of the people that are in the community, but there are some times where, maybe, I mean, we look at community and building it around a shared interest or a shared cause. It's like we're these singular human beings and we only care about this one thing, when we are very complex human beings and we have all of these different interests. So how is there a way, or I guess, what is your take on building a macro community of like a shared behavior or a shared kind of cause, but then slicing it up and being able to have very specific niche communities inside of that you can kind of come and go as you please while still being a part of the macro community?
Yeah, I love the idea. And I know there's one that kind of I've come across recently that kind of aligns with that. I'd love to hear, like, or for anyone to suggest other examples, because I think it's a great way to build community that is like collaborative rather than like competitive. And the one that I'm thinking of is Platformer. I can't remember the guy's name. He's like a reporter. He went independent on I think it's Substack, or just creating a paid newsletter. And what he did was he partnered up with, I don't know, like 5 other writers to create a Discord community that was for all of them, and they all invited their paid subscribers together, and they have like these different subsections within it.
Like a
So I think
super
that-
band.
Sorry?
It's like a bunch of bands that formed another band, a super band.
Yeah, and it's like the idea that the collective is more powerful than just the individual. I'd love to see like how that evolves over time. I think that's quite new in the past couple of months or so. They've started that. But it's like, I think traditionally people are scared to do that because of the competitive nature. But for me, I was like, yeah, we should do more of that. So how can we find, how can we do more of that? I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the example that pops into my mind is Reddit. Like, I don't know anybody that's like super crazy like Reddit follower without having like a certain level of connection and relationship with the subreddits that they are a part of. And so and I don't know exactly how Reddit started, if it started with a collection of micro communities that just became this macro community, or if it was the other way around. But I'm seeing this shift now, and people are not necessarily wanting to follow just to follow, because there's so many things to follow. I want something that's very specific to me and to my interest, but I want the option to be able to find other people inside of that macro community that have different interests than the niche that I'm specifically entering the community to follow.
Yeah. And I guess like indie hackers, they have groups as well, and they develop that over time, which is going from macro to micro. I guess like I was thinking like more like with platform, that's going from micro to macro.
Don't you think like when there's micro communities from a macro community, that's a sign of a healthy community? Like I feel like when people create, this goes back to my placemaking example of like, I created this public plaza. I didn't intend for that to happen, but someone did it there. that means they feel ownership. And when people create micro communities and a macro community, there's some kind of feel like they have a purpose inside the community, and they create something. You're like, well, that wasn't the original intention, but it shows that you feel like you can do that. And I'll say the word engagement, Rosie, even though we're measuring it. But I always feel like when people create subsects in a community, it's a sign of a healthy community. I don't know if that's accurate, but
I think it is.
yeah. Lucas has a question around Apple. Of course, Lucas. Apple's committed following to be an example of a macro community, or is that different? Well, this kind of brings up a bigger question, I think, and I was talking about this before you got on, of the difference between an audience, a network, and a community. There's three things there. Like, people can create an event like a music festival and everybody shows up. They're showing up for that band, or that there's an audience there, but the band has the community in a way, right? Like how they engage with them. The festival has an audience, and there's like these layers of what a real community is. And then when people go out to a networking event, there's a network. How is that a community? But I think that's where you're going with this, Lucas. Or maybe if you're not, I'm just asking my own question then. But do you want to respond to that?
Do I want to respond to this, Lucas?
Yeah, respond to Lucas's Apple's committing a following of example of a macro community. Or is that different?
I don't know. Get into semantics a bit, but yeah.
If I may clarify, I guess what I'm getting at for asking is just wondering, like, at what, I mean, it's kind of like, well, I guess just wondering like where the line is drawn of like what is a community and what is, like a committed brand following, or like, these are customers that aren't necessarily like interacting with each other per se, but there is like an attachment of like, this means something to me that I relate to. And, if I see someone else using an Apple product, there's kind of like a sense of pride, almost like reminiscent of a community in a way. And so I guess I'm just wondering like your take on that. Is that, would you consider that to be a very large scale community, or is that a little bit of a different classification? And ultimately what we're talking about here in like a macro community is just, I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around what a macro community really is, and like how, if that is an example of it or not. That was a weird way of phrasing that question, but
That's good.
I guess like Apple is more like a bit of a cult and a fandom following, right? But you might get like micro communities within it, as like people gather over different aspects of Apple for different reasons. One of my work colleagues is very much into fandom and like the crossover communities. So I think there's a lot to be untapped, and like she shares stories that she finds with me of like, just like fans creating all sorts of crazy stuff and doing crazy things together because they have this common thing that they're interested in. With Apple's case, it would be like, Apple products. People come together over that, and I guess like in very different ways. Is it a community? It's like, I think the overall picture of it, like the overall Apple releases a product and everybody goes crazy, and so I would question that. But yeah, I don't know, semantics, right? It's like what is a community? I think like people who get very protective over the term of what a community is, it's like, well, there needs to be this connection between people.
Any recommended readings or like books or blogs to follow that people should around community? And is there, besides your newsletter, which we already shared the link, so sign up?
Yeah, I've actually got a whole list of books that I've collected over the course of my research, right? I like Get Together. That's like quite a modern take on like well, I wouldn't say necessarily modern, but it's a fresh take on community, and it has a nice vibe to it, and it's got some good
get together.
Example, yeah, get together. I like Peter Block. I can't remember the name of his book off the top of my head, but if you want to go into like deep meaning of community and like start questioning everything you're doing, like, I think Peter Block like really makes you think about everything. But I stuck a link in there with a bunch of books that I've collected, and not all of them are related to community building specifically, but I guess like it's like, what is community building? It's like building relationships and friendships can be seen as part of that. So I've been collecting some books around that as well.
A book I'll recommend, I think it's the best book on friendship I've ever read, because I'm a data nerd and there's a lot of data in it, is Social Chemistry by Marissa King. Just so much information and research into what makes relationships that I've used in my own personal startup and stuff like that. So, okay, any last questions or maybe we'll start with last thoughts, Rosie, that you want to give to the group before we disengage here? Give us a parting shot. Give us a quote.
A quote.
Or something that we want to tweet.
Yeah. Well, I guess like one thing that I've been thinking about is like with the concept of communities, is like, how can we rethink what communities are? And one angle that I've been looking at is like, well, who owns communities, right? So I would ask you all to go and think about who owns the communities that you're involved with. And my argument is that like no one owns it. Like everyone owns it, but no one owns it. It's like no one can own your friendship, your relationships. They might be able to own some of the data, but if you don't treat your community well, people will just walk away, and that data almost becomes meaningless. So yeah, it's just something that I've been thinking about. It's like how can we move away from this concept of let's own community? And I think that a lot of that comes from business. And I think if we can embrace that idea that no one owns community, then maybe it will help us like rethink how to build better communities.
Then another question to follow up on that, like what, from a business perspective, what companies are doing community well? For me, like I have a Peloton. I thought like it just fascinates me that I feel part of a community that doesn't interact. Like it's mind-blowing to me, right? Like we don't interact with each other, except we're part of this community. It feels like community. That's kind of a weird example of a non-interactive community. I just don't understand how they do it or what the psychology is behind that. But any other like recommendations on companies that are building community really well?
Yeah, I think with Peloton, they have the problem where they have too many conversations going on in like Facebook groups, and they just can't handle it. At least that's what I've heard.
That's why I'm not on Facebook.
Exactly. Who's doing it well? I like what Notion are doing. They seem to have like tapped in well into their community, and like people, being like professionals around Notion and just using Notion in general. I think also I haven't dived into them like deeply, but Figma seem to be doing some interesting things as well. And I guess like both of these companies have been around a few years now, so they've had a few years to kind of develop their community, but also very online. It's very online. But like they've been embracing like this whole distributed community aspect as well. It's like with Notion, I don't think they like have a forum, like their own forum or anything like that, but they do more meetups and enable help the community to do things, and they have this like ambassador program for meetups and stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, Rosie, thanks for your time today. This was fascinating. I feel like I just hosted this event so I could just talk to you more. Just listen. But, thank you for everything. We'll send a recap out to everyone that joined today with a link to all your newsletter and everything else. But appreciate your time, and hopefully it's sunny in England today. So cheers.
Thank you.
Take care,
Appreciate
everyone.
it.
Cheers.